Welcome back to the NaNoWriMo Prep-A-Thon. Get ready for perhaps the most productive writing month of your life. From setting up your writing routine hacks to creating narrative arcs for one-off books and series, plus a full roadmap of what publishing your book will look like after the writing's done. I am Morgan, and today we are talking about sketching a narrative arc. The best way to balance plotting your book so you have a clear idea of what you're writing and pantsing your book so you can enjoy the surprise and delight of letting the story unfold. That's half the fun, right? And stay focused on getting to the end of your book. So I will preface this by saying you can use narrative arcs for lots of different types of books. You can use them for novels, for memoir, for nonfiction. Because we are in NaNoWriMo Prep, which is National Novel Writing Month, we are going to focus on novels, on the fiction variation of narrative arc. So if you have more than one book in you, or you're not writing fiction, just bear in mind that things can be moved around a bit, but the general principle of having a visual sketch of the structure of your book is extremely helpful. Oh, Charlotte just said in the comments, I set up my writing place with my antique doll, flute music, peppermint licorice tea, pumpkin spice candle, and chocolate chips and raspberries, all the senses engaged. Got more writing done than in a long time. Congratulations, Charlotte. And you have started those neural pathways of, setting up a trigger, and I do the thing, I do the writing, and it has begun. So congrats. All right, so common challenges for writers and for authors. Maybe this sounds familiar. I'm writing the first book in a series and I have too many ideas. I need to be able to focus and narrow my ideas into bite-sized pieces. Also, I need to come back to writing an hour a day later and pick up where I left off instead of starting an entirely new idea. I need a system, maybe sticky notes or note cards, so I know exactly where my characters and story are today and where they'll be in the morning. I lack the organizational skills to complete this task. Or maybe it feels a little bit more like I'm just not seeing the overall structure of the book. It's little bits and pieces and stories that don't form an overall picture. That's the kind of challenge we're going to be talking about today. And the question that I usually get is something like this: what's the best way to create and maintain the vision of the big picture? And this is often where, especially in the fiction world, we'll talk about pantsing versus plotting. So pantsing means writing by the seat of your pants, meaning you don't know what's going to happen next. And so you're just, along for the ride, essentially. I sit down and I start writing and I see what's going to happen next. Versus plotting, where you actually, before you begin writing chapters or drafting chapters, you're actually bullet pointing out or outlining every single step that's going to happen along the way, or maybe creating a timeline, for instance. And so many people will sort of create this dichotomy of either I'm pantsing, I'm making it up as I go, and I hope it all comes together in the end, or plotting, I'm being very deliberate and disciplined and thinking through every single little thing before I even get started. And I want to offer us this question to consider: could there be an in-between option? And I want to give you some examples of people who fall on this spectrum, but present their structures in a visual way that is unique to them, right? So this is J.K. Rowling. This is her visual representation of one of the Harry Potter books. It's not neat. It's not messy. It's been crossed out. It's a piece of notebook paper turned on its side with hand-drawn lines to delineate, here's the prophecy, here's Cho's and Ginny's timeline, here's Dumbledore's army timeline, here's the Order of the Phoenix timeline, here's, each column is essentially what's happening in each plot line. And then over on the rows, she's got, sort of essentially day by day, month by month, the major days that things are happening. I know, right? Sharon's like, I'm stressed out with that blue pen. Yeah, you can imagine this when we say the word sketching, I love this image of, we're truly just making notes and ideas, and we know it's not going to be perfect, and we're going to end up crossing things out, and we can always make a neater, cleaner version later. But this is how J.K. Rowling did it, and she's arguably one of the most successful novelists in history, right? So I think this gives us a lot of permission. So you can see, there's those columns are all of the different subplots that she's got going on, in addition to the column that says plot, right? This is an independent self-published author, B.R. Curry. She sent us some images of how she plots things out, and she's got walls devoted to, calendars of not her own personal calendar. These are the calendars of like the month of September and October in her novel. What are her characters doing? Where are her characters? She's also got another wall that's just Post-it notes, kind of that timeline effect, and images of the characters. So I think that's a really cool, fun visual. You could also be a little bit more linear about this. I love keeping it simple, opening up a Google Doc or a Word doc and just trying to bullet point it out, and who was it who just said, Sharon's like, give me a bullet point journal and a black pen. I'm kind of the same way, Sharon. It's like, I just want a list, right? Because at the end of the day, I'm going to write in a list. But I want to give us something to play with first, however it ends up being for you at the end of the day. I think there's a really fun way that we can start. And not only start, I think that this can be a way when we get stuck or run up against the wall or aren't sure what's going to happen next, we can come back to this method. Now, I want to admit and acknowledge that there are dozens of ways to represent your vision of your book, right? And if you Google this, like Reedsy has a classic article on the story structure, the 7 narrative structures that all writers should know. And it's this kind of wording on these articles and these books. It makes you feel like, I can't possibly start writing my book until I know all 7 or all 13 or all 25 of, Freytag's pyramid and the hero's journey and the 3-act structure and the Dan Harmon story circle and the 15 curve and the save the cat and the 7-point story structure, right? So it gives us perhaps a sense of FOMO, like, what do I not know? What am I missing out on that, I need to know before I even get started? And the reality is, even if you already know 7 or 15 or 25 different ways to structure a book, theoretically, the real question is, what does your book's structure look like? And this is, really along the same theme that we've been talking about during these NaNoWriMo Prep-A-Thon sessions is, there are people who have found what works for them. They've written 15 books and they've figured out their writing routines and how they structure things out, and et cetera, et cetera. And those people, if they were teaching this kind of material, they would just share exactly what they did. What my hope for us here is that I'm not telling you exactly, here's how I wrote 12 books and here's exactly how I recommend you do it, but instead to give you the tools to actually develop your own systems and your own structures. They're going to work for you not only for this book, but also for your subsequent books. So we're kind of building your writer's toolkit or enhancing your writer's toolkit so that you can know what will work sort of across situations, scenarios, and types, things like that. So the real question, the only thing that matters is, what does your book's structure look like? There is no wrong way to organize your writing. And if you have felt stuck, we've developed a minimum viable narrative arc that helps people to move quickly from ideas to drafting. This is also extremely helpful if you have a writing buddy, a critique group, maybe you work with a book coach or someone like that, and you're trying to communicate what's happening in the story. Creating this kind of narrative arc just for both of you to look at together and reference can clear away a lot of confusion very quickly and help you get clear and help that conversation to be really clear as well. So we do this, like this was a photo from our writers retreat. This is our director of editorial, Heather Price, and one of our authors, Suzanne, she's doing this narrative arc process. We brought big pieces of paper and put them up on the wall and made it fun. You can, this is pretty flexible. So what we need is a structure that's simple enough just to get started, to get the conversation going, get things out of your head and onto a piece of paper. And we need minimum viable. So what do we need to sketch out? I'm going to recommend, and again, these are particular to novels. However, there are corollaries for other types of books, but particularly in a novel, we're looking for a primary struggle in the beginning, which we can call kind of the opening. We need a moment in which the stakes rise and information is revealed. The very first, hint that there is something at stake here and something new happening. That's the inciting incident. Then we need stakes to escalate. More information is kind of revealed as we go through the rising action. And then we get to a point, almost like the point of no return. Like, can this ever truly be resolved? We don't know how we're going to make our way through this. The stakes are absurdly high and it looks like there's no hope, right? That's a climax moment. Then there are sort of consequences following the climax, the declining action, and then the primary realization at the end, the resolution, right? And then optional, especially if we're going to be talking about series, something left unresolved. Sharon, yes, you're welcome to share this with folks. This is, feel free to link to all this information that I'm sharing with you guys. Yes, exactly. And you're already noticing there are corollaries to screenwriting. There are very strong corollaries to memoir, for instance. And memoir writers don't always realize this, but a great memoir reads a lot like a great fiction novel. And then for nonfiction, we have to translate this a bit more. However, you can still have fun and put this, on more of a visual sketch here. So this is the super simple visual that we recommend. This is a basic narrative arc. And I have a document that you guys can print out and use as well. So we've got the opening, we've got the, where's my inciting incident? We've got the rising action, we've got the climax, the declining action. Sorry, I've got to move the chat just a little bit. Okay, perfect. Casey's on it. Casey always gets everything ready to go right away. Okay, there we go. I think I can see better now. Let's get all those back up. If I can do this. I believe I can. Okay, so we've got all of them sketched out here. You can freehand this if you prefer. You can print out the document. I'll show you where it is. Very likely the document, a single 8.5 by 11 piece of paper is probably not going to be big enough with the text I have on it and your own notes. You're probably going to end up, freehanding something of your own, which is totally fine. It doesn't matter if the curve is perfect. You get the idea, right? And so you want to be thinking about the reason that there is this curve, the reason it goes up is because scene by scene, moment by moment, the stakes are rising. Things are becoming more dangerous or more fraught or more complicated or more vicious, right? Or more, whatever that it really typically is a bit of a negative emotion, whatever it is that makes that reader sort of sit on the edge of their seat and say, what's going to happen next? You want to continue to raise that emotion level, to heighten that anticipation. And we're human. And one of the things that we love about stories is that it gets our emotions going. So this does kind of represent that emotional curve upward in, again, that heightened, curiosity, concern, danger, complexity, even like if it's more social dynamics, like complexity, of maybe there's two relationships and it just gets more and more difficult, right? And so we love this. We love to live vicariously through other people and see, well, oh my gosh, they're in this really crazy situation. How is it ever going to get resolved? And then it represents over there on the declining action that it does start to come toward a resolution. Good or bad, you get to decide. But all of those choices are going to come together into a series of events that sort of lands. thunk. And that emotion kind of falls and you're left at the end, either happy ending or maybe less happy ending, right? Comedy or tragedy. It's kind of, as Shakespeare would say, the choice. So I've got a few boxes here that represent each section, and the red boxes represent, sorry, I didn't realize it was building in here, the external side of the story. So this is your scene, your character, what they're doing, where they are, their facial expressions, their dialogue moments. You know, this is like if you were to follow them around with a video camera, what would the video camera capture? Right. And so this is literally, you want that mind's eye of what is happening, what are the characters actually doing in the 3D world, you know, the physical world. And in every single moment, whether you reveal it or not, there is a blue side. There is an internal reality that is happening. And this is important for you to note as the author. Again, you don't have to reveal everything in the narrative itself when you're writing the chapters. You don't have to say exactly what your character is thinking and feeling in every single moment. However, you as the author need to know when this happens, when these two people have this conversation, what's happening in my protagonist? What are they thinking? What are they feeling? How is this changing them at an internal level? So for every single scene and moment that you reveal to the reader, just note to yourself, have that conversation with your character, particularly your protagonist. How does this change how you see the world, how you see your own past, how you see your own, you know, the possibilities for your future? Have that discussion with your protagonist, especially. So if this needs to at first just focus on your protagonist, that's a good idea to keep it simple. What is my protagonist thinking and feeling through every single one of these external moments? Yeah, exactly. Casey says, I find I need to know much more backstory than my reader does. Exactly. So just keep that in mind. If you like the visual, the narrative arc, again, this could be fun to put it on a bigger piece of paper, up on the wall or on your dining room table or whatever. If you end up wanting to make it more like a list or a side-by-side kind of table, you know, take it, run with it however you like. And sorry, I didn't know all these builds were in here. And then let's get to it. I just wanted to note down here at the bottom. So I left this bottom piece here that says in italics and parentheses, except for, underneath the resolution. So particularly if you want to leave the ending of your novel open to further books, you'll need to know from, I don't want to say the beginning, because you might be a few chapters in before you realize, this is how we're going to resolve, except we're not going to resolve this piece, because that's the piece you're going to pick up in, you know, the next book. And so it's good to know, what are we resolving and what are we leaving unresolved that we can then, you know, thread through into the next. Yeah, exactly. Casey's, if you want to put numbers in these boxes and then just correspond, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4 over onto a piece of paper. Perfect. Yep. So what about a series? You know, why would, I think the first question is, why would we go through the hassle of writing a series? Because writing one book is pretty difficult. Why are we already thinking about writing multiple books? And, you know, these are some of our authors, just the reason that they chose to write series. So this is ML Dunker. She's a YA fantasy author. She published 5 books in 1 year. And she wanted to rapidly grow her readership. There is this trend among readers now that we have the speed and ability to publish books more quickly. We like to read books more quickly, right? We used to be patient with waiting 18 to 24 months for the next book in the series to come out. But now we're really seeing a lot of authors who are able to release books in a year or less. And so, readers the good news is that readers still remember you. If they read your book within the last year, they still remember you for, something like 6 to 18 months, something like that. They'll recognize your name again when they see your next book. And if you can get them to read multiple books with you, they're a reader for life. They're a fan for life. Phil Asmussen is another author, published 3 books in 1 year, and was able to get a whole bunch of reviews right off the bat, and so that's another thing that's really helpful with a series, is that you're able to generate that social proof across books and say, that you have this loyal fan base that says, yeah, he can tell a great book, not only in one book, a great story, not only in one book, but across multiple books. Jubilee Lipsey published 3 books in 1 year, and again, was able to stack those ratings. And what's great is when you can get people to read book 1, many of them will come along to 2 and 3, and they will leave reviews for those subsequent books as well. So the next question really is, how do we put together a series? And for this, I actually have a special guest who's going to come up and talk to us a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and promote you here, Christine, but first let me introduce you. So Christine is someone who decided she was going to write a series and become an author, but didn't want to sort of wait around for years and years to see all the fruition. And so when Christine and I first talked, she was like, I have 4 manuscripts ready to go. And so not quite ready to go. I guess Christine had them all plotted out and knew what was going to happen, sketched out, in this sort of narrative art kind of way that we're talking about here. And then went on to publish with Paper Raven 4 books in 1 year, and just told me the other day that she's got 3 more ready to release this year. And so the benefit of doing this is you're really gathering a readership very quickly. You're coming onto the scene as a new author, and you have not just 1 book to sell, you have multiple books to sell, multiple products to sell, which really helps in kind of getting that author income going. So Christine Roberts, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I wanted to make sure I had to move my chat around so I could hit that mute. Thank you so much for having me. Gosh, those still look pretty. All those covers, they still look pretty to me. That was certainly a labor of love, but I had a great time doing it. And I didn't realize that those 4 books were actually going to turn into 7. So the 7th book in the series comes out on Saturday. I'm super excited. And then I am releasing a whole brand new series next year. So
before we dive in to, I know you've made all these cool narrative arcs for us that represent the different types of series, and I've got those loaded and ready for us. But before we dive into that, Christine, I would love for you just to speak a little bit to the person who maybe is with us and was like, okay, I am in for NaNoWriMo, I'm in for writing 1 novel, but now suddenly we're talking about a series. If you could put yourself back in that, before you were published sort of mental space, is there anything that you wish you had told that younger version of yourself about what it was going to be like to write and publish a series?
Absolutely. I was terrified of the idea of writing a whole series of books. 1 book was plenty hard enough for me to do. It felt like it took me the better part of 5 years to finish 1 single manuscript. And I thought, if it takes me 5 years to write another manuscript and another manuscript, I'm going to be an old woman before I have exhausted this small set of ideas that I have. But what I learned through the process is that when you're really good at either developing your characters, or you've got a really great plot, or you're maybe an expert at world building, writing a series is actually just a natural part of your whole creative process. And it is a lot easier than you think it is. It's not intimidating at all when you learn a little bit about how to take what you're really good at and just continue to build that, because what we're good at writing is what comes easier to us. So obviously, wouldn't we want to concentrate on the parts that are easy and then build on those things?
Yes. Okay. So let's dive into which you've already sort of raised this, sort of which type of series might we be most inclined toward, and then that will sort of help us to think about how we might put these series together. So the first type of series that that you talked to me about when we were putting these notes together was the episodic series, and this might be, I guess, your whodunit, your Agatha Christie, your classic Sherlock Holmes kind of series. Can you describe this a little bit for us?
Absolutely. So an episodic series is about one single character. So if you're especially good at creating great, engaging characters, then you're going to want to consider episodic series. And this is just where your singular character has a new adventure in each one of the books in your series. So one of the modern cinematic equivalents to this would be Indiana Jones, right? We love the character of Indiana Jones. He is brave, and he is engaging, and he's very captivating. He doesn't really change. He's the same character in every single one of his franchise sequels, but the adventure that he goes on is different. So in an episodic series, you're talking about taking this amazing character and allowing this amazing character to go on a new adventure in each one of your books.
So the visual that you have for us here is each of the, we're just keeping it to 3 books because that's pretty manageable, especially for kind of a first series. Each of them has a very similar sort of arc. So yeah, talk us through this visual just a little bit, please.
Yeah. So in each one of your books, you're going to have the same sort of overall narrative arc that you described earlier this morning, where you have your opening, your rising action, climax, declining action, and resolution. And it's going to come to a full resolution. We're not going to have to wonder, oh, what happens next? We know who the thief was. The killer does his, big confession. We acquire the treasure and it goes to a museum, or whatever the case may be. So you're going to come and bring that character's adventure all the way to fruition. The great part about it is that when you begin starting working on book 2, book 3, and subsequent books after that, you're not having to go into a whole lot of building this character, establishing this character. It's a whole lot easier. So that whole beginning opening portion and the first 2 major scenes of your rising action are almost going to write themselves. So what you're essentially going to do is to figure out where that climax is going and how it's resolved. And when you look at only having to figure out 2 or 3 pieces of this puzzle, it's a whole lot easier to think, oh, yes, I could absolutely do this. I could absolutely write an episodic series.
What I love about episodic series is it builds that familiarity with the readers. When we talked in our first session about the book idea matrix, decision matrix, and book concept brief. And one of the questions is, what are my readers going to get out of this? What readers love to get out of these is they know the character. They know they're going to love the adventure. They've read 3 of these already. They can't wait for the next one because, life is busy and hectic and complicated. And when we can come to a book and we have confidence that this author is going to write something that is funny or thrilling or has just that right amount of romance or has, that perfect type of mystery, we just look forward to it. We anticipate it. And so it builds this like relationship of trust between the reader and the author, where it's like, don't worry, reader, I got you. I'm going to give you this like fun, thrilling ride, and it's going to have a safe and satisfying ending.
Exactly. And I love episodic series too for people who struggle with that internal character arc that you described in the earlier slide. So a lot of new writers do oftentimes struggle with this idea of building a dynamic character that goes through a lot of change over the course of the novel. With an episodic series, you really don't have a whole lot of that. Your character isn't really going to have to go through dramatic change. You may learn about a new skill or a new aspect of your character, but you don't have to necessarily build this huge dynamic shift in your character arc over and over and over again. And that takes some of the pressure off.
Yeah. I love that. Okay, and some folks in the chat are already admitting they have multiple series underway. So you may find that
I feel that in my bones.
one series might fit this kind of structure, another series might fit another kind. So you've already kind of hinted at this one, Christine, which is the serialized series. We could think about the Harry Potter books for this one. Before I show the big arc,
Yeah, this one's a little scarier looking. So brace yourselves. As we say in the South, gather yourselves. You're going to need to clutch your pearls in a moment. But the visual of this narrative arc really does look scary. But essentially what we're saying here is, if you've got a great plot, if you are a storyteller, if your story is too long to fit into a singular book, or that ending keeps eluding you because, oh, and this happens, oh, and this happens, and this happens. This is the type of serial that you want to consider. So these typically you're going to want to read them in order to get the full arc. So you can see we're still using that blue, yellow, pink to identify the 3 different books. And in order to reach the final overarching narrative arc, we have to read all 3 books. And typically, we're going to want to read them in order. Now, writers, I work with someone to help me with my books because I do write serialized series. So I have I guess a book coach, you'd call it. And she helps me make sure that I open each book with enough of what happened in the previous book, so that if readers do find me in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th book, they can go ahead and get started in the series right away. But then they'll want to go back and read the previous book so they can catch up on all the nuance of character development and things that they missed. So if you look inside each one of these colored ovals, you'll see a smaller narrative arc. So the way I like to describe this is, if you think of a series like the new Star Wars franchise, The Mandalorian, that they have out on Disney right now. You start at the first episode, then you watch the next episode, something happens, then you watch the next episode, something happens. In each episode, we're left with that little bit of a cliffhanger, that little bit of unresolved knowledge about the character or the plot. But on the whole, we're satisfied that at the end of that episode, we can go on with our lives. Like, we have gotten some sort of conclusion about what has happened. And that's the way you sort of need to think of serialized series. It's almost as if you're taking your whole overarching narrative and you're breaking it down into what you would think of as a series episode, right? And your episode has a beginning, the climax, and the resolution in it, but they all link together. This is a little bit more nuanced, but for people who are great at plot development, this is going to be singing your song right here.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier about the what you can do character wise with the serialized series is you can actually have your protagonist grow up really in a lot of ways, or mature, or find wisdom, or find fulfillment in life. That doesn't have to happen like whiz bang fast in a single book. That you can grow with them book over book over book through an entire series, so that by the time you get to the end of book 3, let's say, when you look back at how book 1 began, you're like, wow, this person has changed so much. And I think that's part of what the reader kind of gets out of it. A little bit different than what we mentioned with the first type of series, the episodic series. The episodic series, people, we want that familiarity. We know what's going to happen. We want to read for 4 hours and feel good at the end of the 4-hour read, right? This one, we want a little bit more of that relationship with the character. We're going to be so much more, really have a stronger emotional connection with a character who we see grow over this kind of longer time horizon. Would you say that's kind of what you experience?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I like too that you're going to get super fancy here, but you can also weave in subplots too. So earlier you showed J.K. Rowling's sort of like grid. I'm a plotter, so that just hits me in all my feels to see that beautiful chart with everything organized. But you saw that she had different subplots going on. So you saw that you had subplots that related to Dumbledore's army. You had a subplot that related to Harry's relationship with Hermione and Ron. You have this whole sort of struggle for power within Hogwarts itself. And you have the time and the space in a serialized series to really explore all of that and to luxuriate in all the words that you need to tell that story.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why epic fantasy is, almost always
Yes.
these huge serialized series.
Yes.
And much to your point, Christine, you start here, right? You start with the basic narrative arcs. And once you get these kind of firmed up so that you've got the protagonist journey down, okay, now we can come back in and add, additional subplots or a different color of sticky note, or maybe a different color of pen, right?
And that's where, like I said, this is the kind of series that I write. And so I do have to have someone, even after publishing 7 books, I still have to have someone who sits down with me and says, you have a major plot hole here. This character really isn't following her arc. Maybe we, consider doing something different with her earlier on in the novels. And it's very helpful to have that feedback because this does get pretty complex. I love it though, because it allows me to tell a much more engaging story, and it allows me to develop richer characters that become friends to my readers.
Yes. Yes, exactly. Okay, there's a third type of series, and this one we would refer to as the interlinking series. Can you tell us a little bit about this one?
Yeah, so you've got the Marvel comic franchise up there, and this is a perfect example. Star Wars is another great example of this franchise if you're a Star Wars fan. So you have this world that exists, and all of your books link back to this space that you've created for all your characters to dwell. And while we're throwing fantasy and science fiction out there, this is not relegated to that. When I say world building, I'm not talking about creating a new planetary system or timeline or ultraverse or anything. It could be something as simple as a little small town where each character in the small town gets to have their story told. One of the great examples for this is the Bridgerton series. It's just a sibling group, right? And so Julia Quinn has allowed us to look at different novels that show us the lives of each one of the siblings. And then we can take a look at, in the TV series, they kind of did a little offshoot with Charlotte. And so this kind of gives you an opportunity to sort of expand this world. So this is great if you are a world builder. So you've got this central theme or world or event or small set of characters, right? So it could be like just a few people that you want to follow, like a sibling group, like Julia Quinn does. And so where we were talking about episodic series is great when you've got this really strong character, and serialized series is great when you've got this really strong plot. If world building is your particular brand of genius, then this is the kind of series that is really going to feel attractive to you. So you can link all of your books. And so here we've got 4 books now. You've taken the trouble to build the whole world. We're giving you 4 books in this series, for example, and you'll see a small light colored narrative arc within each book. So you're going to have to come up with the same narrative arc for each story. The good news is that you don't have to recreate the space where all these characters dwell. Authors who write this type of series, my writing partner happens to write this type of series, and she thinks out all of the books in the series in advance, so she can leave little hints and teasers, what we like to call Easter eggs, for her more devoted readers. So in book 1, they'll be introduced to a character, and then in book 3, that character is the main protagonist of the story. In book 4, they'll refer back to, oh, well, this couple, is on their honeymoon now. Oh, they must have gotten married. How nice that you can catch up with this original couple from book 1. So this is great if world building is your particular area of expertise.
Even say world building or even world researching, right? So if we're talking like historical fiction and you have delved into,
Right.
The 1800s and you have figured out everything about the clothing and the food and how the transportation worked and who had electricity and who didn't, like if you figured out all of these things about the scene, the setting, then you can create different characters all within that same world that already existed, but you researched.
Right, exactly. And Casey just added a comment in the chat that he did a role playing game. I know lots of authors that use that same sort of system to create these backstories in these worlds for their characters to live in. And it, like I said, it doesn't have to be relegated to fantasy. It can be historical. It can be contemporary. It can be anything that you want it to be. It's a safe space where all your characters live, and you can sort of experiment and play around with relationships and adventures and intrigue and mystery within the confines of that space.
Yep. So you would have, I like how you have these books sort of connected to a middle area. You can almost imagine that middle area is like the hub of research that you're doing, right? So the physics that exists in the world, the historical details that you need to make sure are consistent from book to book, all of those things, it's almost like the main hub or database of like, where is this information being pulled from? It's all got to connect back to that central area. You might have literally a document or a whole section of the wall that's like, these are the things that must be true in all of the books.
Yes. Yes, I actually do have whole binders with that, because you forget from book to book. And I think that's one of the key parts that you want to keep in mind is, if you do think that this is going to be a series, you need to go ahead and start keeping notes and thinking about future plots for future books, because when you get to book 3 or book 4, if you write them in order, I don't necessarily write my books in order. I kind of work on them as I'm inspired to. You're going to forget. And what was the character's name again? Who was he married to? What color were his eyes? Wait, what street did they live on again? And going back and having to find all of this information can be very tedious, and it pulls you out of that creative flow. And that is what you don't want. So if that information is all kept and is readily accessible to you, you can access it, find the answer to your question, and then continue moving on with that flow without interrupting any of your creativity.
Amazing. Amazing. And while you're here, Christine, I would love for you to get your thoughts on, I mean, you and I talk about series all the time, so I know your thoughts, but just to reassure folks where writers tend to get tripped up, right? We create this type of high level sketch or sketches as appropriate, not because it needs to be perfectly accurate, but because it's too much to keep only in your head. You will come back to it later for reference and refinement. And I'm curious why, or if you could relay for us, Christine, you're a plotter by self-proclamation.
Yes.
You enjoy knowing as much detail as you can in advance of doing the writing. Do you ever find yourself coming back and sort of rewriting, revisiting, re-refining these things?
Oh, absolutely. And nothing makes me angrier than when characters don't cooperate with what is preordained. They tend not to want to cooperate. They want to have an argument when there's not an argument there to be had. They start having dialogue that wasn't pre-sketched, and it's annoying. But I think that's essential to it. Whether you're a plotter or a pantser, you're going to have to keep coming back to this and understand this isn't a marriage, it's an introduction. You're not committed or obligated to anything that's in your narrative arc. It's simply, like you said, a place for you to get your ideas out. And for me, I mean, it's where I get tripped up is where I feel like I should really stick to my plot and not deviate at all from the plan that I have. My writing partner, who is a pantser, 100%, she gets stuck because she has too many options, too many variables that she hasn't thought about in advance yet. So I think that's why we tend to work pretty well together, is she can help me become a little bit looser and go with the flow, and I help her to try to get herself organized. So, but yeah, to me, that's where you get stuck, is when you feel like you're locked in to whatever you write on that arc, and you're not.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's just enough to give you the confidence to say, all right, I think I can start writing, and I think I see far enough down the pathway that I can start writing my way along this path. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so, what we would suggest is get those 5, it might be 6 actually, critical moments that on that basic narrative arc, get those down first. And you can start to fill in more detail along that single narrative arc. And once you get the first one down, then you can start to experiment with, okay, am I going to do episodic? Am I thinking about the longer serialized series? Am I thinking about just building this whole world and having a lot of different characters who all have their own adventures? But get the first one down first and make sure you feel really, pretty solid about that one. And then it will open up kind of the next levels. And just like Christine was mentioning, this is what kills us all, right? Like I need to have the perfect outline before I begin writing. And even while we're writing, I need to stick to the outline, which is, not necessarily true. What we would encourage you to think about is I can sketch an initial outline and it doesn't even take that long, right? An hour, 2 hours, maybe, take a walk, put it on, think about it, sketch it out, maybe take another walk, come back, revisit it. You'll find that even just a little bit of an intentional time on this kind of sketch can keep you focused as you write, and know that you can adjust that outline as you continue writing. And it's really just for the first draft. It's just for getting that first draft done. You're going to overhaul it in revisions. You might as well get started. We're going to be talking tomorrow about a reverse outline to help you. I would suggest that you store your narrative arc so you can reference it later. This is not a one and done. This is like an iterative practice. So you're going to want to keep it somewhere where you can add to it as you're writing and reference it when you're moving into revision. So Christine and our challenge for you today is to sketch and fill out your own version of the narrative arc template, to pick those key moments to focus on. Even if you're just doing this for practice, just for the sake of this week, you're not committing to it yet. We're just getting in the feeling of what it's like to sketch this out and to do this, even if it's just a practice go through. An additional exercise that we both have found really helpful is if you have a book that you love, see if you can sketch a narrative arc for that book. Like it doesn't have to be perfect, and it could just be the one plot line. It could just be the main protagonist plot line. But could you, as the reader, sort of sketch that out and say, oh, I see, this is, how we opened it. These were the rising action moments. I'm pretty sure this is probably the climax, and then what happened for the resolution. That's a really great exercise just to kind of get these reps in. And tomorrow we're going to talk about that reverse outline. And you'll notice that if you go to paperravenbooks.com/nano-resources, we've got the doc here for you that you can download. And again, it's got the little boxes. You can put numbers in them and then, put those numbers on a separate piece of paper, or you can just freehand this yourself. But just to remind you, we've got kind of those external events we want to be thinking about, and those internal reactions from the character's perspective. So that is available for you guys. I'll pop that link in the chat real quick. Nano resources. And here you go in the chat for everybody. All right. Christine, do you mind if you stick around and help me answer some questions, just in case there's some interesting questions that came up while we were chatting? I'm going to scroll back through the chat. Sharon says, I always develop my characters so they can tell me how they react. Yep, exactly. John's in the process of his 5th mystery novel.
That's awesome.
Yep. Susan Elizabeth writing my memoirs, so my character drives the story for sure. Lit RPG has dozens of groups of characters on different continents. Sharon said, so good, clutching my pearls. I love this so much. Amazing. Okay. Yep. Casey with that was the Dungeon Master RPG. Yeah, you have to become really good at world building. People love world building. That's another thing that when we mentioned sort of what's the reader going to get out of this, and episodic readers love that familiarity. I'm safe in this story. I know pretty much how it's going to end, and I enjoy the ride. Serialized, it's all about the relationship with that character as they develop book over book. For the third one, I mean, it really is about the world and the history. If it's a historical novel, like people really love that imaginative exercise of either a brand new world and like spinning off all the different fan fiction. Here's what might happen in this scenario or that scenario, or the historical fiction. And they want to go like live in New England in the 1800s because they love that world so much.
Absolutely. And I will say, I do not write my first drafts in order. So I do not write at the beginning and then write till I get to the end. So having that narrative arc sketched out is really important because I need to know what has happened before I write the scene that I'm working on and what will happen after. So the transitions are a little easier. So even if I didn't have anything written down, because I do write that way, I don't write from the beginning and then write to the end. I may write the ending first. So I kind of need to know what happens right before that. So I do have to have that sketched out in broad brushstrokes even before I start.
You'll put together sort of the narrative arcs, and they might take different forms. Maybe they're actually an arc, or maybe they sort of evolve into a series of notes and things like that. But you'll actually write the scenes out of order.
Yes, I actually create the book out of order. So in the book that I'm in right now, I've gotten, I don't know, 75,000 words finished so far, and I have no beginning. So, I don't know how it starts. I mean, I know it's going to happen. I just haven't written that yet. So, but
That's
yes,
really
that's really helpful.
I think that can be freeing for people too. Is the reason you can do that is because you already have gone through this mental exercise of like, this is probably what the order is and what's going to happen. And so when you go off and write one of the scenes, you kind of know where it's going to sit more or less, right?
Absolutely.
So it actually gives you a little bit more freedom to write what you're inspired to write in a weird way.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I like the one of the comments was she comes up with her characters first and decides what are they going to do. And I'm the complete opposite. I decide what happens and then pick the characters that is going to happen to. So that's the difference between a character driven story and a plot driven story. Either way, whether you're developing that internal arc first or the external arc, it doesn't matter. And that's important too. It doesn't matter which comes first, the chicken or the egg. It can be whichever you want it to be. It can be the characters that come first, or it can be what happens that comes first. There's no right or wrong to that.
Yeah, I love that. And Victoria had a question about, is it reasonable to have multiple arcs in one book for the different characters? And I would assume that yes, you eventually get to multiple arcs.
Absolutely. Depending upon how many main protagonists you have in the story. I caution you not to have too many because then can get a little bit muddy. Unless you're doing it in 21 books and you can just, arc all over the place with all your characters and have a whole family of people. But I'm not that sophisticated, so I have to keep it narrowed to 2 or 3 primary protagonists. And then, yes, but all of them will have some sort of dynamic shift, some more than others, right? So we don't necessarily need to see complete soul redemption of a wayward fellow in order for that to be a dynamic shift. It could just be him overcoming a fear of taking a leadership role that he's thrust into. And that could be enough of a dynamic shift to have that character arc. So when you talk about writing a character arc, don't put too much pressure on yourself for it to be this grandiose thing. It doesn't have to be.
Yeah. And that is part of the reason I think why, when I'm talking to folks about series, I'm really, trying to limit us to like 3 books is a really good starting place. 3 books with a main protagonist and, a couple of secondary characters who have their own sort of mini arcs. Like that's a great place to start, especially when you consider that at first we're just drafting, right? We're just writing the books.
Right.
And we might decide, oh my gosh, I think I can expand this if I add, this. You get one arc sketched and drafted, kind of written out. You may decide, oh my gosh, I have this whole intersecting one.
Right, exactly.
Come through from a different point of view.
That's how that's how my series became a 4-book series and not a 3-book series. Because when I came to you to publish, I had 3 books done. And my writing partner said, no, it's not quite over. You need one more book to kind of wrap it all up and bring it to fruition. And I'm so happy that I did that 4th book. It's my favorite in the series. So I love that. I love Casey says tools, not rules. Couldn't be more excited to see that. Absolutely. Love that.
Yeah, Isaiah said, is there a particularly effective way to organize, sketch, or plot like character relationships or conflicts? A number that works, like 2 characters, 3, 4, that sort of thing.
So I write romance. That's not necessarily formulaic, but it does follow a consistent pattern. And you typically have two main protagonists, and then I have some minor characters that they can play off of. And sometimes those minor characters, if I know that they're going to be a main protagonist in a future book, I'll give them a little bit more depth, put a little bit more meat on their bones, and give them more dialogue within the book. But if, so that kind of gives me a place to start for their character arc. But absolutely, I would say two main protagonists is sufficient for a first draft. That first draft is just you telling yourself the story. So after you finish that first draft, if you feel like there's something missing, you need more voices, then add another main character into it.
Yeah. I would even say if any of us are feeling a little bit overwhelmed, like even one protagonist,
Oh,
because
yes.
you really have to land, at least one protagonist. That protagonist has got to have, this arc from where we meet them at the beginning of the book to what's happening at the end of the book. And any additional characters we introduce should play off of or enhance that main protagonist's arc. Would you kind of agree with that or nuance that in any way?
No, absolutely, I would. In fact, even in romance, not both of your characters will have a major arc of a dynamic shift. One character can be quite static, and then the other is the dynamic one that goes through that main arc of change. And the other is sort of the consistent variable within that match between the two. So there's like, again, tools, not rules. So yes, romance is very popular, Sharon. It's very popular. It's quite competitive.
Yeah. But one of the best selling for sure.
Yeah. And it's so fun for me. Like, I love it because I get to mix a little bit of action, adventure. There's explosions and kidnappings and all that kind of thing. There's international terrorism. It's super fun.
Yep, exactly. For anyone who missed the link, this is a public link. So if you're sharing this with a writing buddy or critique group or anything like that, paperravenbooks.com/nano-resources is a public link. So if you want to, give this narrative arc to anyone else, you just click this, download it, and then it pops open this narrative arc where we're suggesting that you kind of just go through and sketch out. Just use a pencil if you want to use a pencil and like make it really feel like sketching. I'm just putting some ideas on the paper for what's opening, what characters are we meeting, what setting are we in, what's that inciting incident where something is revealed or, there starts to be a bit of a conflict, the rising action so that we get more and more escalation. It's more dangerous. It's more complex. There's more at stake. Climax. Oh no, how will we ever come back from this? The point of no return. Our emotions are, we're on the edge of our seat. And then there are consequences, right? How does this action quickly decline into some sort of resolution? What follows that climactic moment so that we land wherever we're going to land? Optional, except for what are you going to leave unresolved if you want to sort of continue in this series kind of way?
Right. And it doesn't have to be whole long paragraphs either. It could be just a list of words. It could be a printout of something that you've seen or a photograph you've taken on vacation. Whatever it is that is going to mean something to you, the writer, that's what you need to include.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us, Christine. I so appreciate especially because you've been in the thick of it the last, few years. Well, more than that, because you've been, as you acknowledge, that first book is a kicker. And then you kind of get your feet under you.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. We will be back here tomorrow. We're going to talk about an editor's trick for doing a reverse outline, which can help you when you get stuck or when you finish the draft and need to decide on prioritizing revisions. And if you've been with us for a few days and you're like, I really want more, I want to have a writing group. I want to be able to talk to people about these sorts of series. I want more guidance on publishing and being an author and growing an author platform. I am going to talk to you guys a little bit tomorrow about our book coaching and mentorship program, just because we are opening up for a few folks, starting tomorrow. And so we'll have some conversations over the next week or so, and want to give you guys kind of the first heads up. So if you're interested in that or curious, I recommend definitely making it to tomorrow's session. And we might run over the top of the hour just a little bit tomorrow, just so you have a heads up. Tomorrow, all about the reverse outline. It's going to be amazing. Thank you, Christine, for being here. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And y'all have a good rest of your day. Bye, everybody.